What is 501c3 status and do you actually need it? We're going to talk about that in this video. A lot of people think that you have to have 501c3 status to do charitable work, and that's not true. So that's why I'm going to break it down in this video today, and you're probably going to hear some things that are going to surprise you that you thought you knew, but you really didn't know and understand about 501c3 status. So this is what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you the actual definition and what it means. Then I'm going to talk about the benefits of having 501c3 status. Then I'm going to talk about the requirements and restrictions. And finally, I'm going to talk about when you actually don't need it, because again, it may not be the path for you. I'm Tiffany with Boss on a Budget. I teach people how to start nonprofits and how to raise money from the ground up. If you need help with your nonprofit, make sure you are subscribed to this channel because I drop videos every single week. So what is 501c3 status? It's actually a piece of the Internal Revenue Code in the United States that gives federal tax-exempt status to qualifying organizations. Now, I'm using a bunch of words that you may not really understand, so I am going to break it down as we keep going through the video. When I say you are exempt, that just means that when you have this status, you do not have to pay federal income tax. So if you make money, you don't have to submit tax forms and submit a check to the IRS because you're exempt from doing that. Here's the catch though, you are exempt from activities related to your exempt purpose. So if you're doing unrelated activities, you still got to pay tax on that. And also you have to remember that if you're an organization seeking 501c3 status, just remember that you are organized for public benefit and not for private purposes. The main 501c3 actually comes from the section of the code. It is 501c3 if you actually look up the code on the internet. And in that code, it talks about the organizations that are qualified for that particular designation. So exempt purposes under 501c3 includes charitable, religious, educational, scientific, literary, testing for public safety, fostering national or international amateur sports competition, or preventing cruelty to children or animals. So that's what's exactly written in the code. If you meet any of those qualifications, then you are eligible to get 501c3 status for your nonprofit organization. And remember, because some people get confused by this, when you are seeking this status, you are an organization saying you exist for public benefit. A lot of people start nonprofits because they see it as their business and they see it as a way to make money, but also do good for people. But if you're starting this nonprofit because you're seeing it as a way to make money for yourself, that's leaning more towards private profit, private benefit, and that's really not the purpose for your nonprofit. So you just got to be clear on that when you're starting your organization. I've talked about the difference between nonprofit and for-profit in other videos, so I'm linking one above that can help you kind of navigate that choice. And before we talk about the benefits, this is what I want you to remember. Just because you are a nonprofit does not mean you have 501c3 status. A lot of people think they mean the same thing, and they actually don't. You are actually a nonprofit once you fill out your organizing documents, typically the articles of incorporation in your state. So once you're organized and the state has approved those documents, you are technically a nonprofit. The next step is to get 501c3 status, but you don't necessarily have to, and we're going to talk about that later in the video. But in this next section, let's talk about the benefits of having 501c3 status. So number one is the most obvious one. You don't have to pay income tax. So whatever money you bring in that you spend on your charitable activities or the activities that revolve around your exempt purpose, you don't have to pay tax on it. A lot of people get really nervous because they know the IRS is associated with taxes. So they're like, well, when are we supposed to fill out our tax papers and how does that impact my personal taxes? Well, you need to remember that a nonprofit is an independent corporation. Most times it's a corporation, but it's still independent. It has nothing to do with your personal tax profile, right? So again, you do not have to pay tax to the IRS. And this is the key word that you have to remember, as long as you're working within your charitable purpose or within your exempt purpose. Another big benefit of having 501c3 status is that people can write off their donations to your organization. When you incorporate your organization, the next step is to get your employer identification number. That number is the same number you're going to use when you apply for 501c3 status, and that becomes your 501c3 number. And you want to make that number available to folks so that they can use that for their own tax purposes. That has nothing to do with you though. Your only job is to supply the number for them, and then they can seek tax deductions or whatever benefit that they need, whether it's a business getting a tax benefit or it's an individual getting a tax benefit. So some people are surprised surprised to learn that in most circumstances, in an overwhelming majority of circumstances, you have to have 501c3 status in order to get grants for your nonprofit. And I'm going to take it a little bit further. When you get 501c3 status, you're either a private foundation or public charity. Those are the two main different types of 501c3 organizations. Well, you have to be a 501c3 public charity in most circumstances to get grants. Because even if you have 501c3 status, but you're designated as a private foundation, then there are a lot of organizations that will not give a grant to you. So you just need to make sure you understand exactly what you're looking for, the exact kind of organization you are, to make sure you are eligible to receive grants. Here's another low-key benefit: tax exemptions at the state level. So you have to understand that states tax for different things and for different purposes, and the federal government taxes for different things and different purposes. So with 501c3 status, you're exempt from what the federal government wants to tax you on, but you still have to deal with the state. But in most circumstances, as long as you have 501c3 status, then the state will automatically give you that same exemption for state level taxes. But it even goes further than just income tax. Sometimes if you buy things, having 501c3 status will allow you to be exempt from sales tax. So you don't have to pay the sales tax in the state for purchases. But these are all different and separate circumstances. So you got to know what you're talking about. But there is often a benefit for having 501c3 status when it comes to dealing with tax issues at the state level. So my best piece of advice is to get to know the people at your state office, whether it's the Department of Tax or Department of Tax and Assessments. They all have different names. Get to know them and what exemptions exist so you can make sure that you're claiming everything that you're eligible for with your 501c3 status. And the last benefit that I'm going to talk about in this video is credibility. Now, I have done videos where I've talked about the fact that you can, in some circumstances, still fundraise even if you don't have 501c3 status. If you are following your state rules around fundraising and you've done everything you need to, you can ask for money without having 501c3 status, but you need to disclose that status is either pending or you just don't have it. But sometimes people trust you more. People are more confident in your organization when you have it, because for them, it shows that you went the extra step to go through the processes to actually become what they believe is a legitimate nonprofit. Again, you're already a nonprofit when you incorporate, but just in our culture, just how people relate to nonprofits, they think 501c3 status means you are a nonprofit. So it gives people assurance that, oh, I can trust this organization because they've gone through the right protocols and they're actually legitimately set up. So let's talk about the requirements and restrictions to having 501c3 status, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to apply. So first of all, before you go for the status, you have to be organized as some kind of entity. And in most circumstances, people are organized as corporations. In most states that I've seen, there's a specific type of nonprofit, or sometimes it's called non-stock corporation. So you need to make sure that you are organizing as the right kind of business, the right kind of entity before you go seek 501c3 status. And again, in most circumstances, you are a nonprofit or non-stock corporation. You need to have some kind of organizing document because the IRS is going to ask you what's in those documents and if their required language is in there. You have to make sure that certain statements are listed in your documents in order to be approved for 501c3 status. In order to apply, you have to use one of two forms, either the 1023, which is the OG form, as I like to call it, or the 1023EZ, which is the streamlined version of the 1023 form. That is the form you have to fill out in order to apply to get 501c3 status. Some people think that if you go through the streamlined version, then later you have to upgrade somehow to the long form. No, it's either or. Once you get your status, you can go move on and you don't have to upgrade anything. The processing time, those forms have different prices. The easy form, as of the recording of this video, is $275. The long form is $600. And you have to make sure that you're eligible for filling out the streamlined form. So you need to go through the eligibility worksheet and make sure you fit those qualifications before you go through with the EZ. The processing time is different for each form. For the EZ, it may take up to 90 days. And for the long form, it may take up to 6 months and even longer if there's some back and forth and if the IRS needs clarification. So let's talk about some restrictions that are associated with 501c3 status. You cannot do political campaigning. You cannot endorse a candidate if you have 501c3 status. Now, let me just say this. I am recording this at the end of 2025, and the Trump administration is attempting to push the limit on some of these restrictions for 501c3 status, so I can only say what has existed at this point. There may be changes in the future. You can do some lobbying, but in a limited way. It cannot be a substantial part of your activities. And by lobbying, I just mean influencing legislation, pushing to get legislation passed. You can, again, participate in that, but it can only be a small percentage of the work that you do. Any earnings or profits that you make cannot benefit private individuals or stakeholders in the organization. For for-profit corporations, you can have stockholders. So, for example, if there's a good year, stockholders may receive a check from the profits that were obtained during the year. You cannot do that with nonprofits. Just because you're the founder, it does not mean you're entitled to any money earned through the nonprofit. So you have to keep that in mind. Again, you exist to serve a public purpose, not private interests. And even though as a founder, it's your baby and it's your mission still exists for public benefit, not for your own. So you have to put your interests to the side and make sure that the mission outranks everything else. And you're required to fill out an annual information form. It's the 990 form. Now, there are 3 different versions of this form: the 990N, the 990EZ, and then the OG, the 990 form. And it depends on how much money or how much you made in the previous year. So you just need to make sure you follow those guidelines. And even if you did not raise any money, please make sure you fill out the 990 form, because if you go 3 years without filling it out, the IRS will automatically revoke your status. So stay up on that, please. If you need help figuring out how to start a nonprofit, I do have a free startup checklist. So just comment checklist below and I'll send you the link. And finally, let's talk about when you do not need 501c3 status. And some of the stuff I'm going to talk about may surprise you. So if you are a small organization and you're still testing the waters, you're not sure what kind of programming you want to do, you're not even sure if this is something you want to do long term, then I do not recommend you go through the processes of getting a board together and filling out the paperwork at the state and the federal level. Sometimes you just want to let it cook a little bit. And so in that time and in that period where you're just trying to figure things out, then you can seek a fiscal sponsor. And basically with the fiscal sponsor arrangement, you are using the 501c3 number of a different organization. So they're in charge of the work that you do administratively. They're in charge of that, but you do the programming. They collect donations on your behalf and they're submitting information to the state and to the IRS. That's not your responsibility. They will take a percentage and may charge you for that relationship, but it takes a lot of pressure off of you until you figure out what you want to do. So in those circumstances, you don't even have to incorporate. You don't even have to have an official business. You can just do that under a fiscal sponsor. If your revenue is under $5,000, you actually do not have to apply for 501c3 status. The IRS wants you to apply within 27 months of you incorporating, but if you're not making over $5,000, then it's not necessarily required. You still need to submit an annual information form to the IRS, but you don't necessarily have to apply for 501c3 status if you're that small. If you want to do some kind of political work, then you probably don't want to be a 501c3. There are other designations in the Internal Revenue Code that are tax exempt. So you might want to consider being a 501c4 or looking at those other kinds of designations if you know you're going to do a lot of work in the political realm and do a lot of lobbying. And to add to that, if you're a different kind of organization, so you're not necessarily out here to make money, but you're a membership organization. So you exist to benefit your members, like an association or a sorority or a social club. You may not fit exactly under 501c3, but there are other types of exempt organizations where you still don't have to pay federal income tax. You may consider a 501c7. You may qualify as a 501c6. There are other types of designations and they're very specific to the types of organizations. So get to know the Internal Revenue Code and read for yourself, because in certain circumstances, especially if you're not doing like direct services or charitable type of work, it may not be a good fit to be a 501c3. So here's the bottom line for this section. If you are not ready to apply for 501c3 status, or if there's any kind of inkling that it might not be the right status for you, you don't have to rush into it. Take your time. As I said, the IRS even gives you 27 months from when you incorporate at the state level to seek your 501c3 status. I would say they want you to do that within 27 months. But again, even after 27 months, it's still possible to get your status. So you have time to figure this out, to figure out if it's right for you. If you have questions about 501c3 status, if there are some things that are still fuzzy in your head, drop them below. And also, I recorded a video about how to apply for 501c3 status. So if you need that kind of detail, then wait till the end of the video it's going to pop up on the end screen. And if you need help with your nonprofit, just with fundraising or setting it up, you can always visit me at bossonabudget.com. I have workbooks and masterclasses there for you to help you along your journey. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.